listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling. Here is your host, Thomas Allen.
Hey, welcome to In-Fisherman Storyline. This is a road trip edition. We are actually on the road. We're in Detroit, Michigan, here to film a muskie piece with the legendary Jon Bondy. If that name is familiar to you, it should be, because in the muskie world, he developed a bait I guess we will refer to as a jig, right? That's really what it is when it comes down to it, but it's unique. It's a rubber body, a soft plastic. He's going to tell you a little bit about how they're made. But I just learned about an hour ago that Jon was also an Elite Series angler on Bassmaster. And I worked at Bass for 5 years, and I was embarrassed to tell him that I did not know that. And we got into some stories and come to find out that it's not just muskies that he's passionate about. It's everything that swims. So we're going to get his story. We're going to dig into the history of Jon Bondy and the Bondy bait, but along the way probably hear some bass stories. And before we get too deep in the conversation, you are going to hear a little feedback going on. We're actually in the conference room of a Holiday Inn Express in Detroit right now. They graciously gave us this room to record the podcast. You know, we got to record where we can record. We did a show in a hotel room, as weird as that was, but sometimes you just got to take advantage of where you're at. And the intercom in here is actually kind of buzzing. So if you hear that and it's annoying, I'm sorry, but I think the content is going to supersede the annoying feedback we got going on. So, Jon, thanks for joining us in Holiday Inn's conference room.
Hey, man, I've been a big In-Fisherman fan my whole life, and it's great to be with you.
Well, I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm excited about the next couple days. Here's a story for you. 2 stories to start things out. First of all, on the drive here, we blew a hub out of the trailer, the boat trailer, and if you drive a boat, if you have anything that requires long distance wheels turning around, you're going to run into problems. And we've driven that particular boat across the country 2 times this year and a couple times last year. So like, it's been on the road, and I have not ever done any wheel maintenance on that thing. So it is what it is. So we're driving down the road, pull off to get some gas, and Dave walks around and goes, "Yeah, we're missing the hub component here, and there's smoke coming out." And so we got delayed a day, but thankfully we're here in Detroit. We're going to fish the Detroit River, which is the river between Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie. And Jon was telling us before we got here that the wind is supposed to blow 30-something out of the south and would have made a very unenjoyable and likely unproductive day. So while we got the trailer fixed, the wind blew, and we're going to get on the water tomorrow, and the goal is to produce an In-Fisherman TV segment about jigging for muskies. So fingers crossed. We'll see how it plays out, but a blow day sometimes is a good thing, so we're able to record a podcast.
Yeah, you know, I don't know what it is about that south wind in the lower river anyways. When it blows up from Lake Erie, whether you're walleye jigging or whatever, it just seems to turn the fish off. Not only is it hard to fish in them big waves in that river, you know, trying to force your way down the river, but there's something about that south I've never liked.
Well, I've been here when it's blown out of the south, and I've seen motors almost come off a boat. So it worked out, just fortunately worked out. So we're looking forward to the next couple of days. Jon, as a muskie guy, you know what a suic is.
Absolutely.
I've never told this story publicly. This is generally, we'll pour a drink and we'll get into this, but this is got brought up, and I promised Jon I'd tell him what happened. But years and years ago, my wife and I lived in Minot, North Dakota, which is a long way from nowhere. If you've never been there, I guess don't go, but it's a wonderful, wonderful place. We lived there for 3 years, and I met a buddy, Jay, and another buddy, Josh, and 2 good friends of mine, and Jay invited me on a trip to northeast of Flin Flon, Manitoba. So we went on it was a fly-in lake, but there was a portage path in. We were able to tie 2 canoes together, put 2 big 2x12s, drive a 4-wheeler on it, drive that across the lake, 4-wheeler off, and we pulled the canoes through a swamp. The fishing was off the hook. Like, it was worth it. I mean, you're talking 100+ fish days. Your fingers were bleeding with duct tape. It was unbelievable. But I took a brand new suic along that I hadn't caught a fish on. It was pre-musky days for me. Caught about a 30-inch pike, and I like pictures. Back then we took disposable cameras. I mean, that's how long ago this was. I didn't have a digital camera. And I caught a pike, and if you imagine the pike's mouth, we had the rear hook, the belly hook, and then the nose hook from its mouth all the way across his back, right? So he was hooked funny, and I thought, hey, let's take a picture of this. So I lifted this pike up by the belly with this giant bait hanging off his head, and right as my buddy's about to take a picture, that fish flops, and I clutched, and so held it to my chest, and the back hook came off of the fish's mouth. It came off the fish's head, so it was still stuck in his beak, and it went through my shirt, in my nipple, and out my nipple.
That's not good.
Okay, well, the fish is still attached to the other end, so he's shaking like crazy. And I mean, if you've ever spilled coffee on your lap while you're driving, all you can do is scream. And that's all I did. Now, my buddies are good friends today still. A real friend at that point would have been taking pictures like mad, but, back in those days, there wasn't social media, there wasn't all this other crap, and I had a fish attached to a heavy hook bait attached to my nipple. So managed to get the fish unhooked, and now this has turned my shirt like a twisty up ice cream cone. Okay, it's totally wrapped up in the hook, and so we did have a pair of shears in the boat, so we cut the fabric of the T-shirt right there so we could get to the hook. And the funny part of the story is I just popped it out. I mean, it didn't get stuck. It didn't hurt anymore. There was very little blood.
Man, that's you start talking with some people that are serious fishermen about all these hooking situations, and everybody's got a story like that real bad, whether their dog got one or I had a couple incidences where we took our dog out fishing, and he really loved fetch, and we were tried casting and that, and he would just bark and bark and bark. So we went to jigging and actually had my wife out, and she'd never jigged for muskie, and she ended up hooking a good one, and we got it in the boat. And when I was moving the baits out of the way, because the dog was a little rambunctious, he got up and he jumped up and got a hold of a Bondy bait right in the mouth. Oh. And thank God I had the tools and the knowledge as a guide to get that thing out, because it would have been, I don't know how we would have got to the vet in that situation, but I don't want to hear my wife cry like that, and I don't want to hear a dog squeal like that ever again.
Did he learn his lesson?
No. Within minutes he was trying to get another one, but boy, that was a very harrowing. In the process of getting him out, he hooked me. I mean, it wasn't good, but I had the confidence in my ability to just stay calm and end up getting it out. Another time I had a customer where I tell them, you get a muskie on, don't relieve the pressure, keep it tight. They're just going to get away because you're just getting them points started when you set the hook, right? And he had it coming, and the rod was bowed, and I was there with the net, and the fish jumped and threw that 7-ounce Bondy bait at my face. And I put my hands up to holding the net to block the lure from hitting my face, and it got me through both hands, and I was like,
you're stuck together.
I was stuck together. One went right through the bottom of my thumb, and it came out the top here, and that sucker hurt for 9 months.
That probably would still hurt if you hit it wrong.
We end up, one of them was in my knuckle real bad, so we went to the hospital, but over the years, I've gotten good at getting them out. I got no fear on getting them out, but when they're in a spot like that where it hurts, you got to go in,
Well, the rest of my day on our Canadian trip, I had my nipple hanging out of my shirt because of the hole we had to cut into. So that's the funny part of the story. I don't ever get to forget about.
You should really learn how to do it. Like the average guy should really learn how to get a hook out with the fishing line technique, because you go up north, you can ruin a trip.
That's right.
You know what I mean? A lot of trips have been ruined by guys that just got to leave. And it's not that hard to get out as long as it's in a meat spot.
It comes down to staying calm, understanding how to manipulate the hook once it's in your hand, and as you pull it out, the line trick, and just you kind of got to grit your teeth. My son is notorious for getting pretty upset when he sees his own blood, to the point where he'll get hot and has to lay down, and So I've told him, I said, if you're going to fish as much as you fish and you're by yourself and you get a hook in your it's going to happen. You're going to have to like cowboy up and take it. So I think keeping calm is your first task, but most of them, I don't know what you would consider most. I'd say 9 out of 10 hooks are easily removable without any visit to the doctor. People
panic when it gets past that barb though, and there was that show Alone, where they would leave you out in the woods there. And the girl was trout fishing. I'll never forget, she was trout fishing. She was catching a lot of trout, and she ended up hooking herself.
Was it a barbless hook, though?
I can't remember, but you know what? She had to leave the show because she couldn't get the hook out. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, basic knowledge, you'd been able to stay on that show, you know.
That show's not a real good representation of who we are, though, I'm afraid.
I would love to be on that show. My wife thinks I wouldn't last 24 hours, but I would love to be on there.
I bet you would. So let's. I want your story's fascinating, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of it. We're going to try, but I want you to. We were just at dinner an hour ago, and you told me you fished Bassmaster, and talk me a little bit about that. So you're known as a muskie guy, I think, in most circles. Bait builder, you're a innovator, you're a hardcore angler, but you had a passion for largemouth and smallmouth bass.
Yeah, I remember the first Bassmaster Classic I ever saw, Larry Nixon on the Ohio River, and I said, man, I was like 15 or 16. I said, I'm going to fish Bassmasters. I found what I really want to do, and I went on this one-track mind thing. All my friends were, getting jobs and getting married and all this stuff, and I was like, no, I'm going to fish Bassmasters. And I had a lot of people laugh in my face. Some guy from Canada is going to go down south and learn how to fish reservoirs and that. And I'm a perfect example of, boy, if you set your mind and you're hard-headed enough, you can go out and do it. And I'd fish some of the local tournaments, but not a lot. What I would do was I'd save up my money and I'd fish just 4 or 5 big tournaments, qualifiers. And that's where all my money and energy went, and study and everything. And they were down south, they were up in New York, they were all, and if I got on the Bassmaster Opens, and I spent 4 years trying to qualify for that Elite Series, and I did it in my 4th year. And that's when everything went, expensive. $5,000 a tournament. California, we got out there, gas was $5 a gallon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it went crazy, but I was like, nope, I don't have the money to do this, but 20 years from now, I'm going to regret if I don't put every penny I got down and get on this tour. And so I went out and fished the Bassmaster Elite Series for 4 years. And I still remember one of the pros, the first tournament I fished was on Lake Amistad in Del Rio, Texas. And one of the other pros saw me sleeping in my truck at the hotel. And he came up to me and he said, John, I see you sleeping in your truck last night. And I said, yeah, that's true. And he said, you need to go home. You don't need to be out here. And I was out there 4 more years, and I did everything I could to survive out there and lived my dream. I really did live my dream. And I was the only Canadian. There was more Japanese than there was Canadians out there. And the first 4 years of the Elite Series is when I did it.
What did you find the hardest tactic or maybe fishery to adapt to being a northern guy?
Definitely being a Yankee up here, bed fishing. We, in Canada, the season's closed, you know what I mean? And if I didn't, I had to read about it. I had to read about these guys doing this bed fishing, and I got my clock clean on that stuff, and you had to learn quick. We went to the best fisheries with full moons. I mean, Santee Cooper. Here's an example. Preston Clark won that one on Santee Cooper. He went in this place called Rocks Pond, and he had over like 100 pounds. I was in there in practice. I saw him in there too. I didn't see any fish. They weren't in there. And what happened was the last day of practice, it got warm, and there was a little creek that was going in there, and the water hit right, and he said, I looked down and I seen big bass after big bass after big bass going back in there, and he went in there and won the tournament. I didn't have that kind of knowledge. He's from Florida. He's used to that kind of stuff. And so that bed fishing, boy. And the other thing, tidal waters.
Titles, yeah, that's...
I could catch them on tidal water one day.
Yep.
The next day, can't get them. And I fished 6 tournaments on the Potomac River, and I never got a check there.
Yeah.
California Delta, Hudson River. I think I was in like 9th one day in one of the opens. Never caught a fish the next day. That tidal water, man, that just messes with my head.
Oh, it's a combination lock. I don't, and I mean, the guys that are very good at it, they know it. They know the science, and that's something that, and I haven't fished these places, but I covered events there, and I watched these anglers spin out when the fish that they were catching on that pillar or pier or mooring post or whatever were not there when they came through, and then you'd have another angler come through an hour later and just load his boat.
I tell you, I fished the Potomac River one time, and I went in this back creek, and I never seen so many bass in my life in one creek, 100. And I went in there first day of tournament, man, there was nothing in there. I think I caught 1 or 2 fish. And I was just waiting for a tide to get right. And I'm like, they're going to come in here. They're going to come in here. You know what I mean? And when I went to leave, my buddy's sitting on the point at the entrance to the creek, and he got $10,000 check. Just sitting there throwing a Senko on the weed edge. You know what I mean?
They had moved.
They just moved out. And there's 2 ways of fishing in tidal water. You can find a good area and park it and wait for that tide to get right and catch them when it's right. Or you got to have a lot of spots and you follow, say, the slack tide or whatever's a good tide, and you just follow it up and down the river. Well, you better be a local to do that.
That's right.
So for some guy coming in for a week, he's got to find an area that's got bass, and you got to just park it there and wait for them to start snapping.
When Ike and Ellie won on the Delaware River here, this would have been 2014 or 15, so we got to go home, right, and fish his home waters. And I mean, all anybody talked about is how complicated that was, but it's exactly how you said. He'd run and gun. He'd had all these spots. He knew that when the tide was at this level, this particular spot would be good, and he proved it, won the tournament. It was one of the best demonstrations of a tidal bass fishery I think we've ever seen.
Yeah, it's very technical. You know, it's just all the waters that I've been to, that's the hardest thing for me. That tide water, man, coming in, and I'm used to that current going one way and staying there, you know.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I've been a bass angler for my entire life, and I grew up in Iowa, spent a great deal of time in Minnesota, and we lived in Minnesota for multiple years before we took the job at Bass and moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and I went down there thinking I knew what I was doing, and I got my ass kicked left and right. It was super humbling. It took me 3 years to kind of figure out how to catch a bass there, and when I say that, like, I'm not ever going to be a top-level touring angler. That's not my goal in life. That's not my calling in life. But I sure love to fish tournaments. Those reservoirs have their own level of complication that if you're not timing current.
Yep, it's all about when they release that water at the dam.
That's right.
Let me tell you a story. Gary Klein one time, you know, being from up north, I fished for everything, carp, pike, whatever. And I got a lot of confidence one time when I was in my 20s, because Gary Klein had wrote that it doesn't matter what you're fishing for. If you're getting bites in general, you're going to be a better bass fisherman in the long haul. And I went down south and I see these guys like Swindle and all, they don't fish for anything but bass. And they're 365 days a year, bass. And some Yankee's going to go down there and going to beat them. Man, it's not, I mean, outside of Kevin Van Dam, which he had an extraordinary ability, somebody who spends half their year where bass season's closed, like in Canada, good luck. You better be a top-notch angler.
You better be fishing, because I met a lot of anglers and got to know a lot of people down there that they only fish for bass. And there's something to that. If you're going to fish 2 days a week for the whole year, you're going to get pretty good at finding, staying on, and catching bass, understanding their movements, doing all this and that. But I have found that the northern angler is very adaptable, and they've proven that as they've gotten down, as the ranks have moved, right? We have Jeff Gustafson, we got Seth Feider, and there's numbers of other, northern bred anglers that have had an impact. I think that their ability to recognize and fish for other species made them more adaptable to complicated scenarios in the South. Now, it didn't always work, but Jeff Gustafson, as an example, he is really good on Lake Lanier.
Yep.
Okay, that's an impoundment, but you know what those spotted bass are like?
Oh yeah,
they're like a walleye and a smallmouth. They have some similar traits. So I think if you're working in other realms of the fishing world, you're gonna see similarities. You're gonna, we'll talk about muskies in a little bit, but really how a fish positions in current isn't going to change by the species. It may be up and down in the water column, but really they're going to position and feed the same way in current.
Yep. I mean, my top finish on the Elite Series that first year I was in it, I was fishing in 32 foot of water with 8-pound fluorocarbon drop shotting for spotted bass. And I might as well been walleye or smallmouth fishing.
Did you catch them good?
I got them good. And I finished 5th. And if I would have caught my limit each, it was a very tough tournament. But if I would have caught my limit each day, I would have probably been 2nd probably. But, I mean, I was right in my element. It's 32 foot. The average shipping channel in Detroit River is 32 foot minimum. And, just when you get something that you're used to seeing,
Well, one of the things we talked about at dinner is how things have changed. And I think that generationally things changed inevitably. That's just the way things go. Things change. Day to day they change. A bass is still a bass. I think that inherently people are finding more fish in places that maybe we weren't looking for fish, thanks to the electronics and our ability to all of electronics, mapping and side imaging and forward-facing sonar, all this stuff. But talk to me a little bit about your early rig. Like when you were traveling across the country, were you on the cutting edge of technology at that point? How did you rig your boat?
Well, I had a buddy, Mickey Bruce, who really kind of took me under his wing back in the day, and he told me, if you want to make it in Bassmasters, which was my goal, make it there and compete, you need to get a jig, a spinnerbait, and a crankbait rod, throw the rest in the trash, and fish less than 10 feet deep all year. Put 2 flashers on your boat. You don't need no graph. You don't need no GPS. You fish the bank, and that's how you're going to make it. And I tried that for several years, fishing that shallow stuff, and I made myself learn it all. But then we started going up north, and them boys, them Bubba fishermen, they were on St. Clair, and they were going back in the slop trying to throw frogs and stuff like that. And most of them got their butts whipped by these guys throwing the fairy wands that they call them,
That's right.
The little light
spinning pole.
Yeah. So, times have changed, and now I think bass has realized the fisheries that are up north. And I remember Mickey telling me one time he fished I think it was in like '89 on the St. Lawrence River out of Clayton, and he won it. And what he did was he was throwing a flipping jig, and he said not far from the ramp there were these grassy humps, and he said I would throw that jig out there, a full-size flipping jig, on St. Lawrence River, and he said that water would turn black with these big bass, largemouth that were on these grassy humps, and he won the tournament.
With largemouth,
casting a flipping jig, and he's like 2 miles from the ramp. And that's a guy from down south coming up and bringing that, but a flipping jig, you know what I mean? And nowadays, it's all smallmouth.
And I think that there's probably some big largemouth to be caught there, but I don't know unless I can get proved otherwise. I don't know that there's enough big largemouth to be found anymore to compete with the size of the smallmouth.
I'd have to agree with that one. The biggest bag I've ever caught out of the Detroit River that was just largemouth, 18.5 pounds in a tournament. Well, you're not going to get a free pack of lures.
That's right.
You know what I mean? You got anywhere up in the north. Outside of some Minnesota lakes and stuff like that, it is smallmouth central.
I would say it's probably pretty. If there are both species in a lake, smallmouth are going to win. Now, pretty cool example is when the elites came to Mille Lacs that first year for that Angler of the Year tournament they had there. You had guys like Dean Rojas and Ishman Rowe and a handful of others that targeted largemouth, and they caught the fire out of them.
Yeah, same with Syracuse. Dean Rojas won on Syracuse throwing frog around the docks and stuff. I was there.
I think that as people, as electronics have made us more proficient at finding fish, and as the presentations have evolved to accommodate maybe the smallmouth world, I think that they're just such an impressive fish. And when you get a 6-pound smallmouth, why? There's nothing against a big largemouth because I do love a greenfish, but there's something about a big smallmouth too that's hard to turn your nose up to. And there's some of the finest smallmouth fishing just a couple blocks away from where we're at.
Oh yeah, man, this place is blown up. Now there's some years that are better than others for sure. Some years is like, man, what happened to St. Clair? And then the next year it's just unbelievable. You know what I mean? Some years they're easily found, and some years they're just way out in the middle. And every year is different. That's the thing about St. Clair is whether it's muskie, bass, every year is different. The weeds are in different areas. The fish seem to be targeting different bait, and that's what keeps it fun around St. Clair. I remember one time Peter Thiliveros won a FLW tournament on St. Clair. It was like $100,000 or $200,000, and he had this little sandy spot where he was catching 4-pounder after 4-pounder. And I asked him about it, and he goes, we went back there, and I never found that spot again. That's St. Clair to a T. It changes all the time.
The currents probably, and the ice. The ice moves stuff around. So talk a little bit about when you were fishing at that level. What did you learn about the angling communities south versus north? I've always been fascinated that, here we're unless you like to ice fish, and I'll go. I don't live and die by my ice fishing, but I think that it's pretty exciting to go deer hunting instead of ice fishing. So we don't fish 365 days a year here in a boat, period. So how is that community different? Do you feel like we're different enough that there's guys love to deer hunt in the South too, but surely you can launch the boat down there all year.
Oh man, I tell you, there's nothing like being from Canada or the North in general and going down to Florida in February and running a bass boat around in the lily pads. And I mean, good. That is the greatest thing in the world. Your buddies are ice fishing, you're down there flipping, and that is the greatest thing. If you've never done that in the middle of winter, just go down there, even if you're crappie fishing or something. Be in Central Florida in January. There's nothing like it out there. And but yeah, I mean, them boys, they just love fishing. When I started going down there, I was like I think I was just kind of some kind of sideshow. They didn't know what this, that was like, there was no Canadians doing this. And I thought I wonder what they're going to think I'm all about. But I just fit right in with them, right? Because I was like, we're south of Detroit where I live in Windsor. And I fit right in with them guys because I studied them. And they were all legends to me. And next thing you know, I'm in the midst of them. And, after a while, I think they realized that I'm just a good old boy down there and I fit right in. But fishing year-round for bass, I never forget, I was down in a gas station somewhere, and I was just passing through some town somewhere, and I went in to buy something, road food or whatever, and this girl at the counter was talking to her friends, and she didn't realize it was my boat out there, and she says, "What kind of person would go fishing on Easter Sunday?" And I didn't even know what day of the week it was. I was just on the road somewhere, and I'm like, man, I never even, that just hit me, you know what I mean? Like we didn't bass fish in, April up north. And so just being down there, just going to all these famous places, Lake Gunnersville. And one thing that really shocked me in the South, whether it was Okeechobee, Fork, been to Lake Fork a couple of times, Gunnersville, Kentucky Lake, all these guys are crappie fishing down there. You had trouble finding a bass fisherman sometimes. I went to Lake Fork. And
that's crappie central.
I mean, tell you, I was the only guy. I was at a hotel on the water. I was the only bass fisherman there. Lake Fork, right? It's the only bass fisherman there. And that was one thing, because Kentucky and Georgia and all these in Mississippi and these crappie are so prolific down there. And they catch so many fish. We don't get those kind of quantities in the north, And
they replenish themselves at such a higher rate. I would say that we probably have years to repopulate your classes.
I think they're a little more delicate up north. You can wipe them out. You go, I tell everybody that comes into my store, I say, listen, man, you get a crappie spot, you keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
That's the one thing you don't talk bragging about, is because guys will go in there and wipe it out. And then if they're that fragile,
Well, and they're fragile through the ice, too. I mean, if you're catching them out of, I think, 12 to 14 feet or deeper, like, those fish are going to die.
Yeah.
There is obviously an arguable theory about barotrauma and crappies. That's for another discussion. But you're right. The northern fishery is fragile. It doesn't take much to mess it up. There's a lake in central Minnesota that I told too many people about. It didn't have a boat launch. It didn't have a parking lot. You had to have 4-wheel drive. You had to have a small boat, and it was unbelievable. It was 100 fish a day in 4 hours, and your top 5 were 30 pounds.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
I tell you, one of the unique things. One of the unique things I ever had this guy come into my store, and he's a commercial fisherman. Now, on the Ontario side of Lake Erie, we have the largest freshwater commercial fishery in the world. They have miles upon miles of gill net, catching tens of thousands of pounds of perch and walleye every
Tonnage.
day. And this guy told me he's caught multiple crappie like 5 miles off the bank out in Lake Erie in the nets, miles from shore.
That's crazy.
In the summertime, it's like, man, what is that thing doing out there? And that gets back to that story about that muskie that radio tagged in the Detroit River, and it went all the way to Buffalo. And by January, it was back in Michigan.
And now that's a long ways. I guess by water, is that how many? Is that a couple
It's
hundred
4
miles?
hours by car.
Yeah.
4 hours by car from Windsor to Buffalo. Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. And we're going to dig into this muskie thing, but I'm fascinated by this bass side of you, because I love muskies. I'm glad I don't have to pick. I don't know that I would pick muskies. I don't know that I would pick bass. I'm not sure, but those are my top 2 favorite species to pursue. And they've changed me. They've molded me, really, as an angler, as a person. I live and die by my bass tournaments here in Brainerd still, or, I don't muskie fish tournaments. That doesn't compute with me. 'Cause,
Yeah.
I mean, you could lose pretty easily there. But I find it fascinating that the northern angler that has traveled south to fish on the top levels of fishing, there aren't many. There are a couple. But one of the things, this was a defining moment for me. I worked at North American Fisherman in the Twin Cities before I went to Bass. And when I took that job, I remember where I was on the road. We hadn't moved yet, so we were still in the town of Watertown, Minnesota, so just west of the Twin Cities. And my phone lit up, and it said Linder Media on it. I'm like, what? Who is this? I said, hey, this is Thomas. He goes, Thomas Allen, Ron Linder Media, In-Fisherman. And I'm like, I knew who it was by the sound of his voice. And I didn't know that he'd heard. I didn't know that he knew who I was. I had no idea. And he said that, he goes, Alphonse and I heard that you got the job at Bass, and we wanted to congratulate you, but we have commissioned you to take the word south, that us northern guys can catch bass too.
That's right.
And he really wanted to make sure that when we were talking about bass fishing in the Bassmaster magazine, Bass Times, on the website, that the North was getting represented. And I took that to heart. I really wanted to do that, but I'm afraid what I did is I might have brought too much attention to what we have.
Well, there's a lot of them guys down south will tell you, and a lot of the lakes, you got a better chance of catching a 4-pounder up north than down south in a lot of cases. You know what I mean? So
now you might catch a 10, right?
Oh, man.
Not Minnesota.
You go to Texas, let me tell you what, if I could just snap my fingers and move, I'd be quickly divorced if that ever happened. But I would move to Texas. I tell everybody Texas is where it's at. At any given time, you could drop a jig in the hydrilla, and there could be a 10-pounder.
Have your life changed.
Yep.
That's right.
There is no other place. I mean, California's got them too, but they're weird out there.
It's a charmed life we lead. So you fished the elites for about 4 years. Talk to me about the end of times for your professional bass angling career.
Well, we hit the bad recession there, and things were drying up quick in my bank account and in the sponsored world. And I knew when I dropped out, I wasn't going to be the last one, and I wasn't. And we were paying $55,000 a year in entry fees, plus time, all that hotels and all that stuff.
You get over $100,000 in a snap of a finger.
And I remember it finished on Wheeler Lake in Alabama, and I've driven over that lake ever since. And it's hard to do.
Yeah.
But your entire existence, it's like going to the Olympics. It really was for me. Your entire existence is making that Elite Series, and I specifically remember weighing in at Wheeler Lake. And I finished like 54th or something. I missed $10,000 by like 4 spots. I remember standing next to Gerald Swindle, and I said, Gerald, if I don't get a check here, I'm done, buddy. This is it for me. And he said, man, he goes, I'm going to stand right here until I find out. I said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I went out in the parking lot, put my boat on a trailer. I saw Alton Jones, who was a pastor, and I said, listen, man, I'm done. Back to Canada. I'm headed. And I was choking it back, and he said a prayer for me. And that was the end. Drove back to Canada, and then it was on Bass Fan and this and that I dropped out. And, it was a lot of guys would get out there and say, well, I got family commitments, and I've got this and that. I'm going to tell you straight out, it's about the money. Mm-hmm. And these guys that are dropping out, it's rarely about an injury or anything else but the money, because them guys would do anything to stay out there. Mm-hmm. And I was there, you know what I mean? And it was about the money, and they won't tell you that, but I'll tell you, I was just burning through it. And these young guys who get out there now and they want to think they can give a whirl at it, you better have a lot of money, and you better have the guts. You know what I mean?
Do have to have the baseline talent to continue to make that money year over year. That's important. You got to get started, but you got to be able to keep it going.
I'll tell you a story. My buddy fished with Van Dam in one of the events. It was on Clark's Hill Reservoir. And he knew Kevin, and I knew Kevin. And he says to Kevin, he's like, Bondy's out here. Where are all these other guys who historically have fished Bassmasters? And he said that, my buddy said, is it they don't have the money? And Kevin said, Bondy don't got the money either, but he's got the balls.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that Kevin thought that much about me to say something like that. And I was literally just flying by the seat of my pants out there. I would just get a check here, get a check there. I remember one time I was on Lake Murray, and I was 85th place the first day. And I got a call from my dad, and he's like, "Hey, I just checked your mail. You got a $10,000 Visa bill here. What do you want me to do?" I said, "I'm going to get a check in this tournament. And I'm going to mail you the money," because I would go away for 3 months at a time. And he's like, "You're in 85th place, buddy. It's like it's time to do a reality check." Mm-hmm. And it was when the blueback herring was really getting popular. And the tournament before, Kenyon Hill had won throwing this magic swimmer. Little magic swimmer. And I asked him, I'm like, "You got one of them, man?" He's like, "I got one extra. I'll give it to you." So I went out in that tournament. The first day I had 3 bites, got 3 in the boat, was in 85th place. Second day I went out there. My first cast I had a doubleheader. I had 1 on each hook.
Nice.
And I had previously spoken in the morning with my co-angler. I said, "Listen, man," I said, how are you at landing fish? Because we weren't using nets. And he said, "Well, I was a guide in the saltwater." He goes, "I've been hooked a lot." I'm like, "That's exactly what I want to hear." So he reached over and grabbed one, and I grabbed the other fish, and we got both these fish in the boat. And I went 2-3 hours. I got another bite. It was another doubleheader on this magic swimmer. So when the bluebacks are spawning, they get out on these points. Mm-hmm. And when they go across these points, and then all of a sudden here come the bass coming out of the back creeks, and they're up on these points right when the bluebacks are spawning. And you got to be there casting when that thing's busting on the top. And if you ain't, you can see them in the distance. By the time you get over there, it's too late. You got to be right there. I hooked this doubleheader again. Next thing you know, I get it to the boat. The big one comes off. I get the smaller one in the boat. 2-3 hours later, I get another fish on by itself. So now I got 4 fish. Mm-hmm. We come down to about maybe the last 5 minutes of the day, and I said to my guys that we got to go. I'm going to fish this one more point. And I threw that magic swimmer out there, and I reeled it in, and here come a 3-pounder, and he grabbed a hold of that bait. I swung that thing in the boat. I ran across that finish line with 45 seconds to go.
Oh, boy.
I get up on that stage. I'm like one of the last to weigh in. And my roommate's up there, and he's in 50th place, which is $10,000. And I knocked him out by an ounce.
Oh, man.
So I went from 85th to 50th just in a heartbeat. Got $10,000.
That went to a credit card.
I went to a credit card. My dad called me, and he's like, "Man," he said, "the computer's froze up. It says you're in 50th. I said, "That ain't frozen. I told you I was going to do it." 1 ounce. 1 ounce. That's water in the bag. Mm-hmm. Could have gone the other way. My roommate, desperate too, 51st place, got nothing. You know what I mean? So that you're a young kid and you want to get out there, you better be prepared for heartbreak. Because these older boys, they'll deal it to you.
Well, I think that there's hundreds of stories like yours of former elite anglers or top level anglers that, you got in, you managed to stick it out for 4 years. That's a lot longer than a lot of these young guys. I mean, there's a lot of stories, and I told you one about a guy that didn't make it through his second year. I mean, so it is a cutthroat business. It's real easy for spectators to sit back and say, "You fish for a living. That's the life." Yeah, well,
they got no idea.
No, it is one of the most grueling, unforgiving, legendary sports out there, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah, you ever read that Joe Thomas's book, Diary of a Bass Pro?
I haven't, but I think I need to.
Let me tell you what, he made a statement in there. He said it's the most mentally and physically and emotionally draining sport there is. Mm-hmm. And he was right. You got to be so mentally strong and just so hard-headed to get up and go. Denny Brower one time, I said to him, "Denny, what's the best advice you can give me?" And he said, "Whether you finish first or finish last, the minute you drive away from that town, it's behind you.
Yeah.
You forget about it.
You're on to the next
if you drift on it, if you keep going thinking you're a top dog, you're going to crash. And if you think you're down in the dumps and you let it get to you, you're going to, and I'm telling you what, it's easy in hindsight to look back and say I was mentally strong, but man, I had my weak points. Mm-hmm. I had my times where I was like, this is terrible. I remember one time my buddy called me up, and I was in Oklahoma, Grand Lake of the Cherokees, mm-hmm. and I was doing good. I thought I was, for my first or second year, I thought I was catching them, And my buddy wanted to always be out there too. And he asked me, he's like, "Nah, how are these guys that good? These top 100 guys are that good?" And I go, "You know what? I specifically remember. I said, there's 100 guys. I said, they're good, but they ain't unbeatable." And in that tournament, I was like 98th out of 100. And I never forgot that lesson. I said, I'm never going to say they're not unbeat. They are beat. They're good.
I think that sentiment comes from the reality that bass fishing is the fan base of participants. Like, they have their own boat, they fish their own tournaments, and it's easy for anybody to step back and say, I think I could do that. And I think you can say that with confidence, but really, in the competition has only gotten stronger as the high school and college ranks have been developed. And, these kids are coming out of college fishing. And I think that they've had 10 years of experience by the time they've gotten to that point. I didn't fish my first tournament until I was a senior in high school, and it was a paper tournament.
Yeah, the guys I got the most respect for were the guys that came up with nothing. Like Rick Clunn, he lost his house. Mm-hmm. Danny Brower was a bricklayer. All these old boys, they didn't have YouTube. They didn't have none of that stuff. No. And they didn't have forward-facing sonars. Those are the guys that built the sport. Mm-hmm. Those are the guys I respect the most.
And they shouldn't be forgotten.
They should not be forgotten. And, I mean, that leads you to a whole conversation about, a senior league or something like we were discussing earlier, what I mean?
There ought to be a place for that, and I think that we'll eventually see something like that. But I'm a firm believer that the Elite Series is the top level of competitive bass fishing, and you need to have the best anglers competing there with the most current technology and rods and reels and baits and boats and all of that to a point. Now, we've talked about this, having 6 live scope or forward-facing sonar transducers on your boat might be a little bit much, but for now, that's still legal, so that's the way it goes. But there's going to come a time where the balance is achieved, and I still think that at that level there needs to be top of the line cutting edge equipment, because you are the very best. It's the unlimited league. Like, if you're going to compete, you need to be competent with everything.
Yeah, well, at the core of it, the bass fishing is, it's about selling product.
Yeah.
And these depth finder companies, they want their stuff out there.
That's right.
They're investing a lot of money, and then they're hiring these pros go out there and promote the stuff. That's the way they do it.
That's what a professional bass angler is. He's a product innovator and he's a salesman.
That's right.
You got to be able to do that.
And if you can't do that, you better have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not a good promoter and if you're not a good speaker, I mean, you got to be a public speaker. You got to be good at that. Mm-hmm. And you got to have, I'm telling you, I go back to it, you got to have a lot of money. If you're just an average angler, you better have a lot of money and not care about parting with it, Mm-hmm. And it's just...
the road to the Classic is littered with broken hearts.
Oh, my gosh.
Bankrupt.
But you know what? It's easier to make the Olympics. How many there's 20 million bass fishermen in the United States. How many make the Classic in a year?
55.
You're better off trying for the Olympics. Yeah. You got a better chance. You think about it.
And in our ranks, that is heralded as the greatest tournament on the planet. And if you've never been, go experience it. You'll see for yourself. It's an amazing show. And the thing that I love the most, John, is the guys that truly put it all on the line. They cannot hold back the tears when they win. Oh, and man. That to me is one of the most relatable things. I'll be straight with you. Like, look, a sappy commercial will bring tears to my eyes. I'm an emotional guy. But the Classic, I cannot watch that and not cry.
Well, who was your favorite Classic champion? I know mine. I know mine by. I mean, outside of Gussie being Canadian, it was awesome. I was so scared when he had 2 fish, man. I was like, man, I was feeling what he was feeling, But outside of that one,
I can't. I've been to every class. I haven't gone the last couple of years since I've been an In-Fisherman, but from 2008 till about 2020, I was at every Classic.
Yeah.
And there's so many amazing memories. I was on the water for a bunch of those. There's just, I'll tell you the ones that impacted me the most were Van Dam's 2 wins back to back. Lay Lake,
yep.
And then was it? You're putting me on the spot.
Was it Louisiana?
Yes, it was the Louisiana Delta.
Yeah. And
so that was my experience. I was on the water for the Louisiana one, and then I went out and tried to buy those Strike King 2.5 and 1.5 crankbaits in Iowa, and they were not available. Everybody bought them, and so the impact there was I watched it happen. I heard the stories of remember they had the big sonar on their boats and because of the fog.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. But that impacted me. I was like, I got to be a part of this, and I knew I wasn't ever going to make it there on my fishing talent. But I was a writer, I was a videographer, and an editor, and when the opportunity came to work at Bass, it was like it was a dream come true for my career path. And witnessing history, we're getting sappy here, but seriously, when the final hours close in on the last day of the classic, somebody's life is about to change.
Oh, you got it, man. I tell you what, the most memorable one for me was Takahiro Mori.
Yeah, I knew it.
When he was on his knees and he was smacking his hands on the ground, and he came from Japan, man.
Yeah.
He came and he rented a car when he first got here, and he went to the Bass headquarters and was too scared to go in because he thought his English was too bad, and he drove away. And then he comes and he builds this plan, and his parents doubted him, and he came here from Japan, dude. And in those last few minutes, he caught all them fish on that crankbait, and he goes in there and from behind and he wins it. Oh my gosh, that was so emotional, man. I feel for the guy being from another country as well. I was like, he went, man, he came from Japan, dude.
Yeah.
And now there's so many guys from Japan that deserve to be here that are that level,
And they're coming.
Oh my gosh. Like one time I had some Japanese customers, and I told them, their father was working here in Detroit, and these kids came from Tokyo, and I told them that I knew I knew Takahiro, but I knew the one guy. Who's the guy, the Big Mama guy who would always yell Big Mama? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Starts with a K, right?
Yeah, well, they all start with a K. He was
Kiriyama?
This customer was so excited that I knew that guy. He's like, oh, he's the number one in Japan. He's the number one angler in Japan, So they're like heroes over there, And it's such. Can you imagine an American?
Marizo
Shimizu.
That's right.
Well, he was hilarious.
He was so good on stage.
Oh yeah. But can you imagine an American going to Lake Biwa and kicking all her butt over there? Not gonna happen.
Many.
Aaron Martin's maybe. You know what I mean? Them dudes came here with their fairy wands and just
they pushed it.
They put it to us, man. Right. I remember. You remember the very first Japanese guy that won one? It was Norio Tanabe, and he won it throwing suspended rogue jerkbaits on Kentucky Lake for big smallmouth over these long points. He was like the first Japanese guy to come and win a Bassmaster. That was a big thing back then.
Remember the year? Was that late 90s?
Yeah, late 90s, something like that.
Yeah. See, I think that the whole Japanese bass fishing market has pushed innovation here, and they seem to be ahead of us on all of that.
Well, they got Blue Jeans and Elvis and Michael Jackson from us, so
it's a good trade.
But I have in my store, I have all these maps on the wall, dozens of them on places I've been. And people from my part of the world, they've never seen a lake with that shape. Highland reservoirs and all these reservoirs that I've been to, and Okeechobee's up there, and they never dreamed of fishing in these places. And I tell them, see all these lakes? There wouldn't be bass fishing without all these man-made reservoirs. There's so few natural lakes in the United States that all these reservoirs are why we have bass boats and bait casters and bass tournaments and all them.
It's been a culture for decades.
Yep.
And I think it's a culture now in the North for maybe a decade.
Yep.
So it really was born down there, and I think that my time living in Birmingham, I really got exposed to that. I learned a lot about where it started and how to compete and how to break down a reservoir. Here, especially where I live in Minnesota, there's 400 lakes within an hour of my house.
Yep.
And most of them are just glorified ponds full of dumb bass. And so maybe there's an opportunity to master a bait. Maybe there's an opportunity to get a kid hooked on fishing. But the challenge is going down to these 100,000 acre reservoirs or 60,000 acre reservoirs and try to find a starting point. Just start.
And you know what? Every part of the country to fish act different. And you can't fish all kinds of tournaments in Florida and think you're going to go to Oklahoma and catch them. I mean, you got to be so well-rounded.
Yeah.
I tell you a story. I went out to Clear Lake in California, And I was catching them offshore in a Carolina rig. I was happy as could be, but I'd see these locals going by with these swim baits, chucking them in the docks. And I'm like, dude, I know swim bait's big here, but everyone's throwing them swim baits around the docks. Mm-hmm. And one day I went up to the dock during the turn. My bite evaporated. It was the one where Steve Kennedy won and catching them 10-pounders. Yep. And my bite evaporated, and I went up to this dock, and there was probably 25 to 30 bass under the dock between 5 to 9 pounds. And I backed off the dock, and I got a wacky rig Senko, and I chucked it up there, and they wouldn't even turn to acknowledge it.
That's a sad day.
Let alone bite it. I went to the next dock, dozen bass under that dock. Throw that Senko up there. They don't even turn their head. Throw a swim bait up there. 5 out of that 25 will come out after the swim bait.
Wow.
I said to Skeet Reese at the end of the day, I said, dude, look at my deck. Look how many rods I got up here. He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, I saw at least 500 bass today. He goes, I only need 5 of them to bite. And these boys, I mean, it was like 30 pounds to be in the money a day. It was just, it's insane. It was unbelievable. And they just acted different. I mean, who ever heard of a bass not eating a wacky rig Senko? Like, it just not.
It's an annoying presentation. If I have to resort to a wacky rig, that means nothing else is working.
That's right, and that's where I was. That's the level I was at, man.
That's right.
I was like, I came out of California. We went to California Delta. I went to Clear Lake, $5 a gallon, and didn't have a penny in my pocket when I left there. Yeah. Got it handed to me by the West Coasters. You know what I mean? And I didn't I didn't have time to go pre-fishing out there. I didn't know. The California Delta is so weird. You got seals right next to the boat, and you know. And I just got it handed to me, man. And that mentally I took a beating from that. And I wasn't the only one, you know. A lot of boys.
Well, you got a long drive to think about everything you did wrong. Oh yeah, too.
I went that year. The first tournaments were in California. I drove to Florida because my dad was there, and I left Florida. I left Kissimmee and drove straight to California. It took me over a week to catch nothing, make no money, spend a fortune, and drive all the way back across the desert. You know, nothing in my pocket.
Well, you said it takes a determined person. You had the balls to go after the dream. And listen, dreams happen, but they aren't guaranteed to last forever. Nope. But I'm going to use the word stubborn because you are a muskie fisherman.
That's right.
And we are hard-headed bunch. We are bang our head against the concrete to get a bite, and we consider success sometimes just seeing a fish swirl out 10 feet from the boat side, you know, and we're a different breed. I classify myself as a muskie fisherman in some circles and a bass fisherman in others, but I want to know the birth of the Bondy bait. Was that somewhere around the time your bass fishing career was as a pro was ending, or what was that time? It was before that?
That thing was before that.
All right, talk about that. We're shifting gears into muskies now.
Going into muskie. And I remember them bass pros even asking me about that lure. Mm-hmm. I remember specifically some of them had heard of it. Well, I don't know how, but they had. And this is my 30th season as a guide. That's the other thing I wanted to do, just somehow fish for a living. Mm-hmm. You know, it's my 30th season. And about 5 years in, I went not only just bass and walleye, but I started casting for muskie, specifically in the Detroit River. And what I found was I could catch them on a rainy day throwing bucktails. There's a lot of weedy flats and weed edges and
clear
stuff.
Water.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And you could catch them on bucktails and some topwater fish. But if you had a nice blue, crisp day, that was over by about 8:30 in the morning. And you knew it. And on St. Clair, it's not like that. Mm-hmm. But that Detroit River, they shut down, man. Mm-hmm. Unless you got a good chop. That's sunny.
And nobody has time for that.
No.
That's why we didn't go today.
That's right. That sunny, calm day, I was like, I need something better. This is not panning out. I got customers who are expecting fish all day, and after 8:30, they ain't coming. So I was like, I got to figure out a better way. So I realized, since I was a kid, walleye fishing, we all, every once in a while, would get bit off down in them shipping channels. Yeah, or get one to the top. And come June, when the walleye bites kind of petered out, there's nobody in that river except for a few handliners and some guys bottom bouncing and some night fishermen. It's primarily abandoned. You might see a muskie guy opening weekend, There's a few spoon pluggers that would come up and down every once in a while. But I was like, I got to figure out a better way. So what I did was one winter about 25 years ago, I went around and I tried to find anything at a sports show that I thought would be like a big saltwater jig. Mm-hmm. And I ended up settling on a couple of baits. I don't want to name them because I'd have to shame them because they had problems.
Right.
But I would jig them and I would lose everything, or they would get tangled. But I was getting bit, and that's what was astonishing to me. And there's nobody around. I was just me and my customers, and I'd tell them all. I say, listen, man, I'm going to show you something that's going to blow your mind. Do not tell a soul. Do not tell a soul. So I ended up taking all these attributes of these baits, whether it was the weight, whether it was the hook up, or where the hook's laid, and I kind of knew what I wanted in a bait. And I made this bait. I made it the first one out of Bondo, car repair stuff.
That's ironic.
Yep.
The Bondy was made out of Bondo.
Yep. And I made a rubber mold from it. And the first day I went out there, we hammered like a 30-pounder down deep. And for the next couple years, I kept it a secret. I was like telling everybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. And I never thought I'd be ever selling the thing. I just thought it'd be something I use on the Detroit River. It'd be something in my back pocket, not my primary thing, be in my back pocket. Little did I know it was going to be my primary thing, jigging for muskie. And so this was probably 25 years ago now. So I started jigging for them. We started whaling them, and I had some business-minded customers and some relatives and stuff. I'm like, listen, man, I said, there's something about this lure. It's good. What should I do? And they're like, you need to market this thing, man. You got a technique and a bait. That don't happen. That don't happen. So
before you get too far here, talk about your trial and error part there. Like, there
was no trial and error. It was the original.
There was hardly anything to it.
I changed the blade size on the back. I went up one size. Mm-hmm. That was it. The weight, everything is the same from the original. So that's like a gift from God. It really was. It's a gift from God. And I didn't change anything. The weight is exactly 7 ounces. The blade, I went up one size. That was it. And so it just worked. And as the years go by, I think it has something to do with the rounded shape of its head is why it's so good. There's something down there, whether it's sheephead or something, that it looks like that they like. Mm-hmm. And that spinner on the back, I put that there just for flash initially. But as I went along, I realized it provides balance to the bait, keeps the bait from kind of tumbling because it provides a pull on the tail.
It's almost like a prop.
Right. So it provides a drag on the tail, which makes it fall nose first. Okay.
Does it slow the fall a little bit too?
Little bit.
Okay.
A little bit. And if you put too big of a blade on there, you won't feel it. It'll fall too slow. It won't hit the bottom fast enough, and so you won't feel it thump. So that's the right blade size, unless you're going to cast it, but that's a whole other matter. So I was like, man, I guess I'm going to market this thing. Mm-hmm. So I wanted it to be like the Senko or Kleenex. I wanted it to be the bait. If you're going deep, you think of this bait. Mm-hmm. The first article was written in 2004. It was in Outdoor Life. And it was I wasn't happy with the article. There was no contact information in there or nothing, And I ended up there was just the infancy of website. When I started guiding, there was no website. I had a brochure. So it was just the infancy of trying to promote this thing on the internet.
Making the show circuit too, I guess.
There was no YouTube.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
right.
so I just slowly would take all these magazine guys out and newspaper guys out. And I put them on my website, on my guide website, and I started selling them. I had one color. Then I put 6 colors up, and people started buying one. They started buying 2 or 3. Well, I ain't dumb. Ended up making like 30 colors at one point. And next thing you know, I had this customer, Mark from Michigan, and he goes up to fish for lake trout. And I said, listen, I never caught a lake trout in my life. I said, take this bait, take it up there to the Northwest Territories, and I said, catch a lake trout on it and get me a picture so I can expand this. Mm-hmm. Don't catch it on a spoon and put my lure in its mouth. Catch it on my bait. He had one bait. And they, at the time, were trolling real slow with the lake trout were so big, they were taking a Dodger and putting a treble hook on it. That's what they were doing, bigger than a spoon.
So what's a Dodger?
like a dodger for like trolling salmon, like the big flash.
Yes.
They were using those as spoons.
They were eating those things.
Yeah, he's a guy. Now everyone's doing that. He's the guy that started that.
Okay.
And I said, so he puts that bait down there, and they troll real slow, and he starts jigging it behind the boat. Every time he'd put that thing down, he'd have a big laker on. He ended up catching about 200 laker in a week
on the same bait
on one lure.
What color?
And it was a pearl one. And so the next year, I sent him out there with like 35 of them, and he gave them out to the guides, and it just spread like wildfire.
Wow.
And now, and they feed on the whitefish. Well, the whitefish feeds on like snails and stuff, and it's nose down when it eats. Well, that's what the Bondy bait does. And so it was just another thing that fell in my lap. That thing sinks nose down like a whitefish. Boom, lake trout all over it. So, I mean, and then it just took off. It started going into the Kentucky and West Virginia for muskie under docks and on bluffs where there's like laydowns and stuff. Guys there's under boat docks where they're crappy at. The guys are jigging muskie under there with my bait. Then it took off in the Northwest. Now it's taken off out west in like Flaming Gorge Reservoir and places like that where there's huge lakers out there. Mm-hmm. And it's just a jig. When you cut away the fat, it's the most unattractive, plain-looking musky bait out there. No paint, you know.
It's definitely not like, I mean, I could give you 10 baits that I've bought because of how they look.
Yep.
And it would be real easy to walk down a rack with
yeah.
your bait in the middle, be like, I don't know about that, and keep on going.
I tell you, I was at the Chicago Muskie Show one time in the Rolly and Helen's booth, and they had whopper ploppers on one side of my baits. It was the year those come out. They were on the one side, and they had nothing but 10 feet of tinsel on the other side.
Yeah.
People were climbing over me to get to them whopper ploppers, and I got this drab-looking bar of soap thing, and I'm telling you, and I'm freely admit it's one of the most unattractive lures ever, but it's just a tool. Mm-hmm. It's just a tool is all it is. You know, a guy asked me one time, he said, how come you don't paint them? How come you don't paint any of your baits? I said, they don't need paint. Mm-hmm. They're that good. You know what I mean? And it's not like a braggadocious thing. They're just a tool that have had a lot of experimentation, a lot of use. And when guys figure out how to use them, and they're economical.
Yeah.
And they're made domestically. Everything's domestic. Packaging, everything, you know, and that's a big selling point for me too.
So when you had first designed this bait, you first started catching fish on it, you were still guiding. You went to the Elite Series at some point. Was there an evolution of that bait in the presentation from about the birth till really modern days? Has anything changed about it?
Nope.
It's the same.
The way I fish it on the river jigging vertically. Guys have a lot. I could tell you this: the bait has won over 30 muskie tournaments, though, and only a few of them have been in the river current. The rest of them, guys are casting or jigging on static bodies of water. So I'm just a river rat. Mm-hmm. I use it in the current, but most people don't. Most people are throwing it on lakes, making it slap on the surface, and any fish out deep, 50 foot deep, whatever, sees that thing hit the top, and it comes raining down. And they meet it halfway up. So there's a whole, I mean, it's there. You start, the biggest problem I have, and what I really push at seminars is telling people, just spend one weekend a summer going deep. Just in the middle of August, commit to fishing deeper than 25 foot for an entire weekend. No matter how much you want to throw at them weed beds, don't do it. Go deep. Find humps, find literal fish, and jig that thing. And you would not believe how many devotees I've got from just telling people to do that one thing, one weekend fishing deep. And next thing you know, it's opened up a whole new experience because the last frontier ain't shallow. Mm-hmm. The last frontier is open water and deep. And Jim Linder, he'll tell you all about that. Open water, musky stuff. That's where the last frontier is. Them fish are out there cruising around, man.
And they don't see any pressure.
They don't see any pressure.
They're starting to now. You know, forward-facing sonar has turned anglers on to them.
That's true.
Talk me through your presentation. So you say it weighs 7 ounces?
Well, the original, yeah.
Okay. And do you have different weights now?
I got a junior, it's 5.5 ounces. I got the original 7, and I got the Magnum 11 ounce. Mm. And I probably sell one Magnum for every 20 originals.
So the original is still the most popular.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I make other baits. I make the Royal Orbo, the mini wobbler. I make a bunch of different things now, walleye baits, everything. But
You're a mad scientist.
Oh yeah,
aren't you?
man. I'm sitting under a 40-watt light bulb, in the bowels of my, my basement there, just dreaming up stuff all the time. And then come up. I got stuff in the works too that'll blow your mind. That's coming.
I'm hoping to see a little bit of it. So let's talk about the presentation. This is so I have never jigged for muskies. By the time you're hearing this and listening to this, I'm hoping that I'll have how do you say captured my first muskellunge on a jig, and I'm sure I'll watch you catch a few, which is fine. Then that guy gets paid in this program too. So talk about rod, reel, line. Is it anything special? And then talk about your boat control and talk about the jig presentation itself.
When I first started doing this, I was like, I need to get a good bone jarring hook set. So I picked out the stoutest musky rods I had, and that was a big mistake. I had these jerkbait rods. They were like 6 to 6.5 foot because I was like, man, I need to stick them. In the first 2 weeks, I broke 4 of them in half setting a hook. So I was like, something's not right here. So then I'm like, I need something heavier. So I called up my sponsor, Pure Fishing, and they sent me some saltwater ugly sticks, which were like 4 times the weight of a good muskie rod. And I caught my biggest muskie on that saltwater ugly stick. It was worth like $60. 55-inch muskie to this day. Saltwater ugly stick. It's just got like these metal eyelets.
We have them in our shop at In-Fisherman.
They're a beast.
They are.
You could run them over with a truck. And
almost, does it have like the rollers on it almost?
no, it needed those rollers on the tip there, but didn't have those.
Yeah.
But I never broke one of them one time. Never broke an eyelid off, nothing. But
Arguably one of the finest rods ever manufactured.
Yeah.
And affordable.
But it was heavy. And if you're going to be jigging 8 hours, man, I tell you what, it took it out of me. So I ended up moving on to Fenwick HMXs. And
boy, those were great rods.
oh, man, I wish I had a bunch. I had a bunch when I was
the
on.
green ones had the green stripe on them?
These were brown.
Brown, okay.
And I was on the
Yes.
I was on the Elite Series, and I was sponsored by Pure Fishing at the time. God bless them. And I had an allotment that I could order.
You're ordering muskie.
And it was
your bass sponsor.
It was a lot. It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'm ordering spools and spools of 80-pound braid, big spools, and muskie rods, and Revo muskie reels, and I'm just ordering all this stuff that I'm going to need guiding. And they questioned me at one point. I'm like, "What are you doing with all this muskie?" I'm like, "Don't worry about it. It's my allotment, and I'm going to use it in Texas or something, And
it's actually pretty smart. I mean, if you're going to put all your money on the line to compete, you need to make money when you're back on the river
That's
here.
right. I was smart. I bought all this gulp and power bait, smallmouth stuff for the summer when I wasn't on tour.
You still have some of it,
Oh, yeah,
don't
I
you?
got lots of it. I still got some of that stuff, but one thing I don't have.
The question is, can you get that gulp juice baked into your Bondy baits?
We're going to talk about that after, about scent, because I have very strong opinions about that when it comes to muskie. But
Okay. We'll get to that. I'll hold that. We'll table that question. We'll get to that.
So I think that so I started using lighter 8-foot Fenwick muskie rods, and I never broke another one for probably 15 years. Never broke another rod setting a hook, and I realized that too sharp of a rod, too stiff of a rod, whether it's 9 foot or 6 foot, I think you lose a lot of fish because I think you open its mouth when you set the hook. If it's extra heavy, you'll open its mouth. You need something that's like a medium heavy, or it depends on the manufacturer. So medium heavy to heavy. And so you're almost not drop shotting for them, but when you set the hook, it's not so forceful. And that's where I'm at right now. Longer, so you got the good parabolic action, and not too stiff. And you can keep them on. You know what I mean? And there's all kinds of theories about when they bite it, let them hold on to it for a second, then set the hook. I had a customer one time, he's like, "Oh, there he is," and he's feeding line off the reel. And I said, What do you mean there he is? He goes, "There's one on there." I said, "It ain't bass. Set the hook." And he ended up getting that fish in. He had that musky bait in its mouth, and he ended up getting it in the boat. But I'm like, man, maybe he's onto something. This is a soft plastic bait. You know what I mean?
I sucker fish in the fall. That's one of my favorite things to do after a long year getting my butt kicked. And you have to let him eat that. You got to give him time.
Yeah.
But I think a muskie, when he has a meal in his mouth, he's not letting it go.
I want to think if it's a soft meal, I agree.
Piece of wood, maybe.
Piece of wood,
Yeah.
he's going to try to shake that thing, you know. Yeah. But so now I use just 80-pound braid and muskie reel, and I just jig with a good leader, and I jig down the river like I'm walleye fishing, except I'm jigging it 2 feet high instead of 12 inches, you know.
So your rod reel line is pretty normal for muskie anglers. There's not a whole lot of difference in what that is compared to other presentations.
Yep.
But your boat control is something I found interesting, and I'm going to let you get into this, but we did something very similar on the Tennessee River below Pickwick Dam fishing with Phil King for giant blue catfish. So walk us through this, and then I'll make that comparison.
All right, so what I'm trying to do is when I'm fishing the Detroit River or the St. Clair River or even the Niagara River, I want the boat, the jig, and the current all go in the exact same speed down the river. So when I put the trolling motor down, I tell my customers, don't drop until you look over the side and you see a weed or a leaf or something, and it's going the same speed as the boat. Then you can drop down. Now, the problem is the wind wants to push you away. So if you got a wind from whatever direction, the wind is the enemy, not the current. The current's your friend. You're using the current to cover water. And in this river, you're honking down the river pretty quick, you know. So I'm fighting the wind. I'm on a bass boat, so I'm aiming the bow into the wind, and I'm drifting down, and I'm just touching that electric. Now, we get a day like today, I'm on that electric quite a bit. Tomorrow, it's going to be calm. I'm just touching it every once in a while to make sure I'm going the same speed as a bubble that's floating by me. And then you drop to the bottom and you jig, and that's how you stay vertical. You know, it's same with walleye fishing. That's how we fish around here. You just stay vertical. You know, just drift the same speed as the current.
So does that bait then stay below the boat, or does it kind of get behind it a ways?
It stays below the boat, but you got to keep hopping it. You let it sit on the bottom, especially walleye fishing, it'll pull away from you inch by inch. Having that bait, even a walleye jig, having that bait up, swimming through that water column is what keeps it vertical. So one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're walleye jigging out here is they don't hop it frequently enough. You can be good on a trolling motor, but if your customer is not hopping it enough, every time it sits on the bottom, it's pulling away. Up off the bottom and swimming, that keeps it vertical. You know?
Well, to me, it sounds like the weight of the bait is pretty critical to maintaining the action with the current. And did you experiment with, I mean, you have a heavier one and a lighter one, but the 7 seems to be ideal for the Detroit River. Is that the same weight you would use in the Niagara?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same type of water. Although the Niagara is very snaggy.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is just hold it there or jig it a foot or two off the rocks. You touch that bottom and they just eat the bait.
Yeah.
You know, so I haven't done a lot of muskie jigging. I've done a lot of bass fishing in the Niagara River, and I know what it's like. And the guys that I know that muskie fish there, they don't let the bait touch the bottom, especially up near the bridge, and it's like cliffs down there. So you can either just hang it. You know what you can also do, whether you're on a lake or wherever, is we got a fish the other day. We just had we can use 2 rods on the river, so we just had one hanging tied to a rope. We had it hanging a couple feet off the bottom. You can see it on depth finder. It's a couple feet off the bottom, and they'll grab it. Fish will grab it. It's like having an extra rod. We had one pull the rod right in the river there a couple days ago.
So tie a rope to it.
Tie a rope to it. But it's, you know, it's another fish to catch, you know.
So are you, when you're working the bait up and down, is it a continuous motion? Is it up, and do you ride it down, or do you let it flutter down?
No, I let the lure pull the rod tip down. So I'm a little quicker on the way up, and then I'm real slow on the way down. The second I touch the bottom, I'm back up. And in that motion, it's going 2 to 3 feet down the river.
Okay, so it's literally hopping down
Right.
the river.
And
speed.
I've tried to compare it to trolling because I'm covering a ton of water. And the Detroit River is 32 miles long, and it drains out in 20 hours on an average windy day,
Okay.
on an average day. So in 8 hours, I'm drifting 12.8 miles. You compare that to a guy trolling, okay? I got one rod out. My customers each have one rod. A troller's got 2 to 3 apiece. Might have 6 guys out there on St. Clair.
Gosh, yeah.
How many fish are they getting in a day versus me drifting 12.8 miles. How many fish am I getting in a day on one rod? It's up there with the trolling bite.
And you're not having to clear grass. And
That's right.
That's a hot
right.
mess.
So, here's one for you. I do about 22 hops a minute. So in 8 hours, it's 10,560 hops. That's where I get the pipes.
Yeah, I can tell. Or that's just your tenacity.
All 150 pounds of me.
So what's fascinating about this is you don't. It doesn't sound like you lose a lot of baits. I'm sure that you probably have, but are you touching bottom, or can you get by without touching them? Is that an important part of the presentation?
I touch the bottom every time,
okay,
just to know I'm there. Unless there's an area where it's slimy on the rocks, or some areas where there's that algae stuff.
Yeah.
If you're going to snag in the Detroit River, if you're like say Fighting Island or mid-river up, you're going to be snagging an old boat or an old barge, because there's nothing down there but pieces of wood there's a lot of history in that river, guys smuggling whiskey, and there's a lot of barges and stuff. You could see them on the side imagery. You see all these old barges and boats. But if you get south of there, if you get down in Trenton, that's where the bedrock comes up. Used to be a lot of rapids and stuff in the lower river by the mouth of Erie until they dredged it all out back in the day. And now it's a lot of jagged rock. It's a lot of rock that's been moved. So you get down that end, you're snagging bedrock, limestone. But in the upper half, it's old boats and stuff, because I've pulled up big old pieces of wood with bolts on them and stuff. And what I do is I very carefully, without getting my fingers caught, I'll take that braid, and first thing I'll do is if you snag that Bondy bait, you give it a few good hard pops before you drift too far. Because if you drift too far, you got a big bow in your line from the current, right?
Yes.
If I can't get out in them first few hops, I very carefully now wrap it around the cleat, and I let the boat try and pull it out. And I'll probably get half of them out. I'll get half them baits back.
Okay.
So it's better than cutting it, basically. That's what I do. So the snags happen.
That's the nature of the beast.
There's more baits at the bait shop.
That's right. So you've developed this program. I know that I have a guide friend, Steve Jonasy in Iowa, that has used it on currentless reservoirs that are not super deep. They might be in, by the dam, they might be 60, 70 feet, but really it's a unspoken technique there. Not a lot of guys are doing it. So in the case of fishing currentless water, do you feel like is it just a lift and drop, same kind of thing that you would do in that environment?
In certain situations, there's a lot of people don't realize. You go to Lake of the Woods, and you find an island somewhere.
There's a ton of current.
There's a ton of current generated by the wind mostly.
Yeah.
So you can almost make a river type situation by going between an island and shore and jig through there, and that'll change by the day depending on the wind and this and that. So if you're in a currentless situation, it depends on what kind of structure you got. If you got standing timber like in Cave Run, you can just fish in the standing timber. If you got a deal where you're going to be like in Georgian Bay or in the Coarthurs or something, you can cast that bait out there into a likely spot where you think the muskie might be suspended or on the bottom, and just swim it back without touching the bottom. Believe me, if you throw it over deep water and there's a muskie there, they see it. They see it raining down.
And they're going to come.
And they're going to come check it out. And no one's. That is so off the wall type.
It is.
So it's like you could fish it. I know guys in certain. I don't even want to say where it is, but guys go and they'll jig, and they'll jig like breaks, okay, and then move 20 yards, jig some more. No current whatsoever. They'll move 20 yards with the electric, jig some more. Move 20 yards, jig some more.
And do you think that's just a basic drop it off side of the boat?
Yep.
Work it up and down.
Yep.
Okay. So really, if in a muskie casting scenario, you're running the trolling motor at 5 or 6, and you're making a cast figure 8, making a cast figure 8, so you're covering a little bit of water. So you move in a vertical presentation, or flooded timber or deep docks or anything like that. How long before you think a fish is going to show up if he's there or not? A minute?
Yeah, pretty quick. And just keep moving. You're covering water. You're fan casting, as Al used to say. Get out there and fan cast for them.
Fan cast.
But, I tell you what, Al Linder was such an influence on me growing up.
Yes.
him. I mean, who were your biggest influences?
It was Al Linder.
Yep.
I mean, I've told this story on this podcast, and I'm going to keep telling it because it really, when I got that call from Ron Linder, all those, when we moved to Alabama to work at Bass, like that's a moment I will never forget.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I was born in Wisconsin. We moved to Iowa when I was in 4th grade, and that's a tough time to move. There's no good time to move, but it was hard on me. And Dad bought me a tape when we lived in Muscatine, Iowa, and it was a In-Fisherman Greatest Hits. So I'm in 4th, 5th grade, right? And I'll never forget, as long as I live, Ron saying, we're on Hatchet Lake, and we're fishing for big northern pike, and he's using a pistol grip bass rod with a spinner bait, and look at this, he catches this 50+ inch pike, and I'm like, man, I've got, I want to do this. This is what I wanted to do. That was my early inspiration to work in the business. And then second of all, I want to catch a 15-inch pike on bass gear. Just and the catfish stuff that In-Fisherman produced, that made me. Yeah. I took that entire video and put it to work where I grew up in Iowa.
I mean, I read them things religiously, you know. Al Linder, and I'll tell you a story. He was the one guy that I had never met. Mm-hmm. And one day I was at the Chicago Fishing Show, and I looked over in the booth next to me, and who was standing there? Al Linder. And I told him, I said, man, you have no idea. I said, you have no idea why I'm standing here is because of you. Mm-hmm. Of course, he just laughs, you know what I mean? Like it's no big deal, but he influenced so many people. I remember one time I was telling Fred Romanis about how I got to meet Al Linder, and he was like, man, you met Al Linder? I'm like, yeah, he loved him too. I mean, he just was just like, man, he's the man. And I'm like, I know, because they fished for everything, Well,
and he's talented in a way that I hope I can be one day. He remembers names. He remembers people, and his ability, like that was, I think, Ron's mind was the business. Ron's mind was meeting deadlines and what can we do to push the envelope forward on bait development and content and teaching people. And Al was the guy in front of everybody. And it, the Iowa story expanded a little bit because I went to my first trade show, an expo. Went to the Quad City Expo, which is, I don't even know if they still have that show, but I remember it was so packed, John, like you couldn't walk down the aisles, elbow to elbow. And there was, I told my dad, I said, I want to go listen to these seminars, like Dave Sanda's here, Dan Sura, Al Linder. Yep. I don't know if Doug was there, but I knew there was a group of them. And I was walking through and I hear this, make way. And here comes the cops and the security pushing through the crowd. And it's Al Linder, Dan Sura, and Dave Sanda.
Oh my God.
And they walked him to I don't know if it's a stage or what. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I was, again, 6th grade, right? I was a little kid. And they gave their seminars, and Dad had to pull me out of there because I wanted to listen to everything they had to say. I was like, there is no bigger influence in my life than In-Fisherman, Al Linder, Doug Stange, Dan Sura, like the crew that pushed me.
Larry Dahlberg.
I could take you to the stretch of Lake Shore in Tiffin, Iowa, where I caught my first bass on a Texas rig because of the In-Fisherman education.
Yeah, I used to buy everything Al talked about, fat wraps. I bought every color. I don't even think they make that anymore. I bought everything, double buzzers.
Double buzzers, yeah.
Gotta have them. You name it, I had it because of them boys. And so anybody who thinks that, they want to sponsor anglers and stuff and that they don't have an impact, I'm telling you what, the In-Fisherman crew had an impact. I remember one Dave Sanda episode where they were throwing these little MEPS type spinners at smallmouth, and man, I was like, I gotta go get some of those. You know what I mean? And they got like one fish in like a 10-minute segment. It was like a 4-pounder. I don't even remember where they were, And then Larry Dahlberg almost talked me into buying a fly rod from fishing for shellcracker in Florida. I was like, I'm gonna get a fly rod. I'm glad I didn't, because that would have messed me up big time.
It would have messed me up too.
But those guys. Remember when Al Linder he had a guy fishing on he was throwing crankbaits and he wasn't catching any. And Al come up in a scuba suit, Do you remember that
I
one?
kind of
he's
remember
like,
that.
Man, he goes, I was catching them here yesterday, and I was like, there's a cold front. They're shut down. You got to throw a jig. Give me a jig. It doesn't matter the color. And he jumped in the guy's boat, and he caught a bass right on his weed.
Yes. That was, I don't know if that was
classic.
I don't know if it was Bass in the Grass. I don't think that was the video, but it was the Bass series. I do remember that.
Yeah.
You remember the muskie, the great muskie hunt, right? And they Doug and Al are in this cabin setting, and they, I'll never forget this. The sound. No, it was Larry Dahlberg that pulled. It might have been Doug too. I'm trying to remember. But they had this giant wooden box. It looked like a toy house full of muskie baits, and they were the old Bobby baits. Those classic, tapered broom handles. And he pulls the lid off and clunk on the table, and he pulls out one of the trays, and you can hear those solid wooden baits clanking together on the wooden slat that they were hung on. And I was like, I can't believe those lures catch fish.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm fascinated by this. Now, fast forward probably a year or two. In fact, honestly, that's wrong. Before we moved to Iowa, Dad took me and took our family with some cousins to a resort in Ontario. It was not Lake of the Woods, but it was ballpark there. I don't remember the name of the lake. I couldn't tell you the name of the flowage, but there was a river coming through it, and there were muskies there. And I can tell you we were fishing with Zebco 303s and bobbers, and I'm wearing some stupid big orange life jacket. There's pictures floating around somewhere. And I remember seeing, this is where my muskie bug came from. And I remember what was going on is there was this family of ducks swimming along. And to this day, I've not seen it ever happen again. Family of ducks swimming along. And I think the third one to the end got 8. And I watched it. And I said, Dad, I want to catch that fish. And I'll never forget this. And he goes, good luck.
Yep.
And that, the videos and learning from, watching Doug fish with Dick Pearson and Doug, who's the other Doug at Lake of the Woods.
Oh, Doug Johnson.
Doug Johnson. Like that's what got me out of bed in the morning, was to go do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And to be here now doing it, John, I'm going to tell you a story. I got a plan, and you're a part of this already. You don't even know it. I had, when I pulled out of my driveway in Alabama, coming to work at In-Fisherman, I was intimidated by the brand, because it was so important to me. And I wanted to, it's changed since the lenders have left. There's no denying that. It's been through several ownership changes, and that'll change the face of the employment. It'll change the face of the brand, but there's been a stalwart there. His name's Doug Stange.
Yep.
And he's carried that brand for 40 years. Our 50th anniversary is in 2025. Doug just turned 75. Okay.
Yeah.
Dude, the guy still does it. The guy still goes. He's 75. Muskie fishing's a little out of his scope. He'll tell you that, but he still goes. So I had this idea while I was driving north the last time. I thought, this story of the In-Fisherman is an untold story. And I'm like, how do we collaborate again? How do we get the players together again for one last dance and one last explanation about what happened? And honestly, John, it took some consideration. It took talking to the right people. I didn't want to cross any lines corporately, because competition is competition, but I had to find out if the lenders would be willing first. And so I had a meeting, and I told them that I want to use this podcast, In-Fisherman Storyline, to tell the In-Fisherman story. And we have not started recording those yet, but I got Al's blessing. I got my leadership's blessing. Michael Carney, thank you, Michael. Like, this is country crossroads of fishing. And I think there's going to be an episode where we get Doug and Al to sit down together. They both agreed to do it. And so our 50th anniversary, there are going to be 50 episodes. And the list, John, is long.
I can imagine.
In fact, it's going to be more than 50. So as soon as we have a couple pieces of particular gear that show up to our studio at In-Fisherman headquarters, I'm going to start cycling through. And it's going to start with Al's childhood. It's going to start with Doug's childhood. That's going to be one episode each. And we're going to work our way up into, we're going to talk about the selling of In-Fisherman to Prime Media, I believe it was in the day, and the development of lender media. This podcast is, what we're doing now is a pilot, if you will, to what we're going to talk about with the lenders, with the whole crew. Would you listen to that?
I would say that's going to be one of the most listened to things every generation, like 5 generations, man. I mean, little young people up to old timers, like everybody knew In-Fisherman. Everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just back in the day, I mean, if you read their book on how they started the whole thing,
I've read it.
Oh my
It's
gosh,
unbelievable.
what a great book, you know. And I think that
there are tens, there might be millions of anglers like you and
I agree.
that have a memory.
Just all the books, like
the information,
the Handbook of Fishing Strategies, and the hats, the classic hats, and the catch and release sticker, and I mean, just
we've brought back those hats.
I've seen them on there. I don't know. You bring me one.
I will send you one. I'll be honest with you, we're out. They've sold out on the website.
Well, that'll tell you right there. I mean, just all the books, the smallmouth book, the largemouth book, the pike. I had them all. I still got them.
I still have them too.
You know what I mean?
I've read them cover to cover.
I have too. And how to approach things. And I mean, you just, the stuff that they did. I mean, you think about just catch and release.
Or catch and harvest in a time of catch and release, which is an important thing.
Yep.
The selective harvest is something, Doug, we do an episode every year or a segment every year where we talk about selective harvest and how important it is to the future of the fishery and really why we do what we do. Because those days, I mean, you remember the old muskie days where they pound a spike through their head on a board and there'd be 20 of them there. That was the thing. But, I haven't broke this news yet to our listenership. And I've kind of been waiting for the right time, and we had a cool conversation at dinner. We're having a great conversation now, and to hear your look back on your influence and your ups and downs fishing the Elite Series as your dream came to life and then it crumbled at your feet. Like, I can relate to that, and I think that if it's Elite Series or fishing with your grandfather in a 14-foot Lund or the duck blind or anything, we can all relate to having our dreams fulfilled in the outdoors, and then to some extent they kind of fall apart. And it's really up to guys like you, guys like you're John, you're a crazy man. I can't wait to get in the boat with you tomorrow because you're so driven to be successful. You're thinking outside the box, and there's not a lot of people like you out there, and your story's unique in that. And that's really what this is about, is if we inspire one person to pick up a rod and reel after falling on their face, then we did our job.
Yep. You know what really gets me going now that I'm now that I'm older. I've been guiding 30 years. You know what gets me going is creating new ways of catching fish. That's my number one thing right now. And I try to make videos and I try to show people, hey, you can catch this walleye in a totally different manner you never even thought about. And that's what gets me going in that. And I bring that back to In-Fisherman. I mean,
that was the groundbreaking stuff they did.
They did that stuff, and it influenced me so much. Like, honest to God, without Al Lindner, Ron Lindner, Doug Stange, I could be prison inmate number 221. Like, you literally.
Who knows?
You know how many lives they changed?
Countless.
People were headed in one direction, picked up an In-Fisherman magazine and headed in a totally other direction in their life.
That's right.
And I mean, there is so many untold stories like that. You could just.
That's why In-Fisherman storyline was created, is to tell those stories. And another thing, John, I know that you'll agree with me on this, but because of our influence, or Ron and Al's influence on us, I feel I'm commissioned to pay that forward.
I agree.
It is my responsibility, your responsibility to influence, and within reason. You're not going to give away your waypoints. You're not going to give away the patent to your bait. Like, there's a point where you want to influence somebody to keep going when things are tough, or to, make another cast when things are tough. And a good friend of mine, he was on the show, one of our earlier shows actually. His name is Eric Ali. Works at Eagle Claw, and he's one of the most philosophical anglers I've ever met. He's always got some good thing to say about. He has something good to say about everybody all the time, and I love that about Eric. Eric, if you're listening, you're a good friend. We filmed together last year. He's come to Minnesota, and he posted something the other day about those of us who work in the industry. Whether you're a guide, whether you're a writer, whether you're a videographer like Dave Penning or Doug Stange, you do have a dream job. It's a NFL dream. It's not something that happens for everybody. Okay. You got to put in the work to get there. It's just like the Elite Series. If you set your mind to it and you have a way to make it happen, dreams do come true. But because of the opportunity we have to sit in these chairs, to get in the boat, and to create content to teach people, it is our obligation to do our very best to make sure that the message gets out to people that want to learn more. And to be the kid on the shore of the lake in Tiffin, Iowa, making my first cast with a Texas rig, and never forgetting making it work. So we have to do a good job. We have to do a better job as technology advances, as information is at people's fingertips. We got laptops, we got phones, we have forward-facing sonar. All, when used correctly, is a good thing, but can be taken out of context, can be abused, right? So how do we take that message that was put into our soul from Al Linder, from Doug Stange, from that entire In-Fisherman crew? How do we take that mindset and pass it on to the next generation? Tell me a little bit how you would do that.
But it's a great time. You know why? Because during COVID, we sold every jurisdiction in North America sold tens of thousands of fishing licenses to people who have never had one.
At unprecedented levels, right?
That's why boats were hard to get, gear was hard to get, and there's a ton of people seeking knowledge right now. So it's almost like a new generation of people out there that are just they're just craving knowledge.
Yes.
They come into my store all the time, wanting to know everything about bottom bouncing and planer boards, and I just got this boat, and you know what I mean. And I'm lucky I live in an area where the fishing's incredible. Mm-hmm. But I think we almost need to like look back and see what the success, like that Al and Ron, that they launched it from,
where it started,
and look at them and say, what was the key things that, you're just going back to the basics when you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a foundation. I feel like you can maybe have a shorter learning curve with technology today, with videos today, with
YouTube.
Information. Absolutely.
I mean, crazy YouTube.
Yeah. So did our generation and the Linders and Doug Stange, did that generation pave the way to make it easier for people to learn? I mean, the answer is yes, but we also, I don't think we should forget where it came from. It's important to share that history, and it's important to continue to build that foundation.
Yeah, that's what I was telling you earlier. I got so much respect for these old timers because they didn't have all this stuff. They came up the hard way, and they taught us. Mm-hmm. Rick Clunn said repeatedly, like, we're the ones, we're getting beat by the kids we taught.
That's right. You're raising your competition.
That's right. And they did all the hard work, and we just milked them for it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And now same thing's going to happen to this generation. You know what I mean?
There's an obligation. This is the point, I think, that really the In-Fisherman story that we're going to tell on this podcast is that generation, there's already numbers of them that have passed away. And their stories are briefly told in a short obituary. And that's sad, especially the guys like us who grew up in that era, who learned from those personalities and the people that paved the way, that were trailblazers in this industry. So I think it's my obligation, our obligation, to find a way to capture those stories, whether it's in print, whether it's in a video, if it's in a podcast, whatever it is, before that generation is gone. We have to get to work now, because the foundation you spoke of, the Denny Browers you talked to, the Rick Clunn, like, their stories carry a level of influence then that I still think is powerful today.
They matter to me. Those guys matter to me. All them old timers, Tommy Biffle, all these guys, man, they matter to me. And these young kids nowadays, they don't have that. They didn't never seen any of that.
They didn't grow up with that type of influence or information.
They didn't grow up with Al Lindner. They didn't grow up watching the Bassmasters. They watched it from the 2000s on. Mm-hmm. They didn't watch it back in the late 80s when it was in its heyday. Right. You know what I mean?
They're watching it now as a throwback.
They're watching it, but man, I tell you, there's so many things in my mind that I've watched on on In-Fisherman and on Bassmasters that I play back. And I don't know, it's a totally different game now. It's a totally different way of, with YouTube.
Yeah.
Just think of the kids that have influential YouTube channels out there right now.
Well, they call them influencers, which is a term I hate.
They're guys fishing on shore. Yeah. Are getting more hits than Denny Brower. You know what I mean? And it's like, man, it is just weird. We're in a weird stage right now.
It is weird. But see, there's something carnal about that shore stuff. You're like, I'm glad to see them doing that.
Yep.
You know, and you know,
It gets people out there too.
it does.
Yep.
If you're sneaking into a golf course, I'm not encouraging that. But I mean, we did that. I did that.
I remember when I was a kid. Fishing with my buddy, and my buddy Stanley. We were fishing. My friend lived on a canal, and he dropped this white twister tail down this old wood piling at the very end of the canal, and I'm standing there, and I'm like, what do you? And he pulled about a 3-pound largemouth out right there on the shore, and I'm like, they're that close to the bank? I was a kid, right? That really lit the fire. It was 3 or 4 instances like that really lit the fire in me. I don't even need a boat. I could catch these fish right here on the bank. You know what I mean? And next thing you know, here I am doing all that stuff on the shore, and all my friends pretty much got out of fishing, and I was just fishing in every piece of shoreline I could find. You know?
So talk about, I mean, we could talk for hours. I can tell that clearly, and we're gonna for the next couple of days. But one of the things that's always, I guess, kind of impressed me is people that have a drive or desire. They find a way to get to where they want to be, and sometimes that road changes. There was a time I thought I was going to work in the hunting industry. Then I went and covered a walleye tournament. I at that point I could have given a crap about a walleye, but that decision, I needed to put some money in my bank account as a freelancer, turned my entire career path. Didn't intend for that to happen. So I've heard it said oftentimes, and I've struggled with this, is, you know, well, so-and-so doesn't have an opportunity to fish, and so-and-so doesn't, you know, they can't afford to buy this technology. And you know, I have the technology on my boat. You have technology on your boat. We're not going to talk right now about the viability of forward-facing sonar, 360, or mapping. We're not going into that. But if you love something so much, you're going to find a way to do it. And if it's fishing from a shore, like, rock on. If your first boat, my first boat was a 14-foot double wide, double deep John boat that I turned into a makeshift bass boat. And because of that, I'll never judge another man's fishing boat, because I was there too. So there's a progression, right? If you're going to start on a shore with a curly tail and watch a bass get hooked out of 6 inches of water, you know, that's going to encourage you to go back and try something else. And eventually you're like, well, I do need to get out on a boat. I do need to get away from shore to try these other things out. And so
that grows the industry. It builds the industry.
That's it. It's the seed. It's the inspiration that we're talking about that eventually turns you into whatever boat you have now. I mean, what I want my son to understand is that I had a crappy boat to start with, and he's probably not going to have as crappy of a boat.
Yep.
So am I spoiling him? I'm going to support that, but he's got a job, and he's working 60 hours a week so he can buy a boat next summer. I didn't have that mentality when I was his age.
No, I didn't think a boat was just out of the question.
There was, I wasn't even thinking about it.
You wouldn't even think that you could even save up enough to buy one. You
want to know what I did? In my high school ag class, I built a raft out of 4 55-gallon chemical drums, the plastic ones.
Sounds good right about now with the gas prices on them.
Well, that's true. And we floated that thing down the creek. Yes, I said creek in Iowa. That's how it is.
I called that.
We caught a whole bunch of fish off of that thing, but it eventually tipped over and sank. We didn't seal the barrel.
I remember making Paul Elias laugh one time. He used to have the deep cranking video because he won the classic
the reel and kneel.
Kneel and reel.
That's
so
right.
To get extra depth, he would kneel down and he would stick the rod down in the water, and he would crank the bait, use the crankbaits. And I said, Paul, I just want to tell you, I said, I had your deep cranking VHS tape, and I could tell you that thing word for word. And he was on some lake in Mississippi or something, catching giants, big bug-eyed bass on them, you know. Mm-hmm. I said, I can tell you this. I said, I was the only person in North America kneeling and reeling from the bank because I had no boat. And he thought that was the funniest thing. I was kneeling, reeling on shore because I didn't have a boat. And, you know, stuff like that, man, you don't forget. That was one. If you could ever get your hand on a VHS tape, it's Deep Cranking with Paul Elias.
It's got to be out there on YouTube now, you think?
It might. And he had a worm fishing one too. And I loaned that thing out. I don't know where it went, but that influenced me, and I love throwing crankbaits now. I mean, I learned a knot. I learned a knot on that video called a king sling. And I've never seen or heard anybody use that knot ever since. But Paul showed you how to do it in that video, and I use that knot today.
Still.
It's a loop knot. And
So similar to what Rapala showed back in the day when they tie the line to that original floater, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I used to watch that tape, and I'm telling you, I am a big crankbaiter now, man.
Yeah.
Bigger than I've ever been.
I was when I first started fishing tournaments. I loved throwing a crankbait in some of these lakes in Iowa or timber lakes, and I learned how a buddy and I, Jeremy, we started doing well in bass tournaments throwing crankbaits in the trees, and we lost a lot. But we discovered that if you use the right line,
Yep.
use the right rod, you can feel that stick coming before
Coming
your
up
baits
to it,
ever
yep.
get there. And
Yep.
we didn't break dirt with that technique, but no one ever showed us how to do that.
Yeah, another thing that's very influential to me is when David Fritz was throwing that pose crankbait.
Yeah.
I don't even know if you can get a pose crankbait anymore. But that was an influential period of time, too, when he was throwing that crankbait.
I love a crankbait. I love a crankbait bite. Oh,
I tell you what, I was in a tournament one time in Kentucky Lake, and I was fishing Lake Barkley. And I met this local, and he said, I was down there a month ahead of time, and he said, you got to find this crankbait color. It's a pose, and it's certain color, certain pattern. And he goes, you're never going to find one anywhere in the Midwest. This is the one color. If you could get something painted like this. And there was a bait shop across, it was like a small little gas station bait shop across from my hotel. I went in there, and one of them baits in the old pose packaging with a fish shape was hanging on the wall. It was like godsend, you know what I mean? And I took that bait, and I won $10,000 with that bait in the tournament. That same color, you know what
There's
I mean?
something about it.
It was just happened to be hanging there.
Yeah.
And this guy lived in that town and never saw that bait on the water. He would have bought it,
That's
you
right.
know? And it was just this one pattern. And I tell you what, I just love the crankbait. I've been doing a lot of walleye fishing with bass crankbaits, DD22s and stuff. Oh my gosh, I can't get over just having that wiggle stop and that rod load up. There's nothing like
There's
it, man.
nothing like it, and the phases you go through as an angler. I've considered myself a crankbait specialist for a long time, and I'm using that term loosely. But I was pretty good with the crankbait for a long time, especially in Minnesota, and I really learned how to fish a jig. I'd used them before, but got good at it in Alabama. And after coming back to Minnesota, I'm like, I'm going to use a jig here. Well, of course, a lot of the dudes in the tournament series that I was fishing were using jigs and whatever. And, it's taken me some time, but I haven't used a crankbait in a tournament in 2 years now. And it's not that it won't catch fish, but I'm having a lot of success with the jig now. But I'm also starting to think, well, all right, I've got that that trick in my bag still, right? So I'll pull that out because I'll promise you, and I've joked with these guys I fish against, if I can get them to start eating a DT10, like I'll go to work on you. I will catch them.
I love that DT series.
Oh, it's such a good crankbait.
Yeah.
So I think that you can have your favorite presentation. My favorite is whatever they're eating. Except for a wacky rig, I get so tired of that. But by golly, they hammer the crap out of that thing. But if you're willing to recognize a condition, adapt to that condition, and then produce results from there on, that's an angler. You become an angler when you're able to make those adjustments quickly. And I think you'd agree, the best anglers in the world make quick and wise decisions.
Man, and you better be good at it. Mm-hmm. You better be able to just throw everything out and start over.
Cut everything off and start over again.
In a tournament, you just paid $5,000 to enter. If you're not willing to do that, you're going to get your butt kicked. You literally got to just scrap the plan. Yesterday was yesterday.
It's I think you would agree that this plays to muskie fishing too. You can't force feed them your favorite bait. You have to give them what they want. Now you might need something that'll move a fish, that'll give you an example of, okay, he was this far back, he didn't really seem interested. Okay, I got something else here. And the only thing, this is my last question for you, and I want you to elaborate on this. And I love asking this question of seasoned veterans because it's so important. Everybody listening, listen to this right now. How important in making those decisions, watching a muskie eat boat side or out at the end of a cast or in 30 feet of water, how important is time on the water to determine the changes that occurs in that fishery? How important is that time?
Spending time out there, I mean, you get a sixth sense of like Rick Clunn used to talk about all the time, the Zen stuff and sensing things. And I tell people all the time, you have to be aware. You have to be constantly aware of everything around you. A lot of times, like on St. Clair, if we see the sturgeon jumping, the muskie are snapping that day. And I come to realize that the reason they're jumping is because they've been feeding heavily on the bottom, and they're sucking up all the weeds, and they're cleaning out their gills. That's how that's what they're doing. And it takes you a while to realize. I mean, the average guy will go, look, that fish jumped. But the average fishing guide is going to look over and go, that gave me a signal that something's about to happen.
The only way you're going to learn that signal is to be out there.
Time on the water. And it's the same thing with these guys that just fish bass all the time, you know what I mean? Being out there and just spending more days. I would literally, in a lot of my, when I was, especially was on the Bassmaster, I was on the water more, I was on the water more days than I was physically touching shore. And that, after decade, adds up in this innate, it's almost hard to explain. It's like
it's almost a spiritual connection.
It is. And you know, Rick Clunn talks about this, how the Native Americans would probably be the best at their connection with the outdoors and the animals and he tries to tap into that. In a lot of my early career, I really studied Rick and tried to figure out through meditation or anything you could just grasp. You know, he goes to these like wilderness schools and stuff where they teach you how to like
breathe a certain way and
how to, like, here's an example. One time I was in college and we went hunting. I'm not a hunter, but I went along with the boys and they were rabbit hunting. And I instantly picked up. I said, we're not going to get nothing. And they said, what are you talking about? We just walked up. We just got in the field. I said, you see a bird? There was not a single bird. There was not a single squirrel. There was not a single rabbit. That day, it was just dead stillness. There was not a being of any kind walking in them woods except for us. You did not hear a single bird chirping. And you got to be able to pick up on that thing. You got to be able to, like, I know instantly now as a guide, I know instantly when that wind changes 20 degrees. When that wind shifts 20 degrees, I go, wind just shifts. You know, and that over time
tells you something.
It does, and it helps you make quick changes in your plan, quick, you know, and it's just something that it's hard to teach.
It's time on the water.
It's time on the water, and it's just, man, it's just, that's the one thing that the top anglers, they grasp for. They try and reach that level of blending in and just trying to, like, tap into that somehow, like,
become a part of it. I mean, you spend a lot of time on the water. I spend a lot of time on the water, and I feel disconnected. I get grumpy. I'm short with my wife. She's like, you need to go fishing.
That's right. And you know, and I hear Rick Clunn come up and he says, he goes, I've spent my career trying to intertwine myself with life in the with these animals. And when they ask him, where do you rate yourself out of 10 as an angler, as a top angler in the world? He says, I'm a 2. It's like, man, we got a long way to go. We got
you have thought you've learned everything, you have not.
We got a long way to go to become good anglers. If Rick Clunn, 4-time classic champion, guy that I grew up worshiping, is calling himself a 2 out of 10, you know, I mean, and he's like the master at trying to connect with nature and trying to feed off it and trying to just use it to his advantage to capture fish, you know, and he's a 2. We're like, I always tell people all the time, we know, like in the Detroit River, when it comes to the fish, we know 5%. You take the top guide on the river, and that person knows 5% of what these fish do. Literally. Every year there's something comes up, or I caught them this way. I caught walleye in 4 foot of water in August. You know what I mean? We know nothing. In the big picture, we are so infantile in our knowledge.
But that's the attraction to me.
That's the attraction. It's the pursuit.
That's right. I want to learn something new, and I've talked with anglers that are of my dad's generation, and they will not do anything but throw a jig. They will not do anything but throw a worm. same rod and reel they've had for 20 years. And I get that comfort as I've aged. I'm a little younger than you, but I'm not far behind you, so I'm not calling you old. But I have found that being comfortable is nice. I don't like updating my phone. I don't, there's things I just don't want to do anymore. I'm like, man, I'm starting to sound like my dad.
You know what? But don't be that way.
You got to embrace the change.
You don't be that way. Because I was listening to an interview one time of a famous fishing guide somewhere in the U.S. I was traveling somewhere, and he said, they asked him, what's the key to being a good fishing guide? And the guy said, be aggressive. Don't be happy with your 3-pound bass. Mm-hmm. Go out there and try to figure out what's going to catch something bigger or more fish. And when you're aggressive enough and you keep on thinking and keep on experimenting, that's what makes a good fishing guide. And we, when you talk about connecting and trying to figure out what these fish want, every once in a while you get that glimpse where something worked.
Yeah.
It worked to perfection. And man, you want it again. You want it again.
It's like winning a tournament.
It is. And then you want to just get that rolling somehow. That one glimpse that worked for you.
If you've ever fished a bass tournament, and okay, a walleye tournament, maybe even a muskie tournament, but when things go right,
oh man,
and you've made all the right decisions, you wonder why those guys break down on stage, because the hundreds of events that led them to that point where they weren't clicking,
that's
where
right.
things didn't go right, and to have it go right on that stage, that's why it's so important to pay attention to the wind shift, to pay attention to the current speed, to pay attention to, I saw a fish flick, or there's a piece of a crawdad in my live well from a fish I've caught.
Yep.
You can pick up a bass and sniff it and tell if he's been eating crawfish or not. These are little things. It's funny, but the truth is, if you're connected to your environment, if you're a part of it on a regular basis, as often as you possibly can be, then you're moving forward to being the best you can be. And don't be afraid to be challenged. I know you're going to like this. Embrace the failure.
Yep.
If you get pissed, and
embrace the suck.
Embrace the suck. I've said that before. That's a great. I should get that tattooed on my arm. But you have to embrace losing, and that's not necessarily a tournament. It might be breaking off a fish. It might be.
If that don't motivate you, maybe like things that are challenging are just not for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have to be motivated by failure.
Yep. And love to learn.
You
almost have to love to fail.
I know when I made the Elite Series, the year prior to that, I missed qualifying by literally one fish. Mm-hmm. All I needed was one more fish, and I was like one spot out. And all that did was make me just burn. You know what I mean? And then next year...
It teaches you to make the most of those moments, too, as they occur.
That's right. You can't screw up. But I tell you, motivation. You got to have motivation. And I really believe if you really want to be a good bass fisherman or a good fisherman in general, don't try to be a good golfer like Tiger Woods. You got to focus on fishing.
Yeah.
You can't be good at this, good at whatever. You got to focus on fishing. That's why I really don't have any. I run. That's my only other hobby. I
do not run. I should run more.
You don't have any time. If you want to be good at something, you got to focus on that. And don't complain when you're donating all your money into tournaments because you spent the weekend before golfing, right? Yeah. You got to focus on something, and if you want to succeed, you got to just do it.
The guys I've had on this show, we do a version of this called After Hours, and I get some like-minded buddies around, and we bitch and we criticize each other and talk about what's going on in the industry. And the common thread with these guys is they are on the water every single chance they get, and they win. They win tournaments all the time, and people get sick of it. And this is the thing, like what you just said is something that I want people to take home through this conversation is, if you're fishing a tournament or you're just going to your local lake, if fishing is your disconnect, okay, don't you want to be successful while you're on the water? Let's be honest. You want to catch a fish. If you're limited to 1 week a year to fish, you want to be successful. Then I would make the most out of every second you have to study, make sure your equipment's in order, your batteries are charged, everything is good to go, because you don't want something out there that kind of slows down your success or takes away from that experience. So you have to commit the time to preparing yourself on and off the water, keeping your mind clear, focused. We're talking Zen. We're talking some crazy stuff here, but the reality is, to be successful in fishing, you have to determine how successful you want to be.
Yep.
And then the amount of work you put in will reflect that
Well,
success.
a lot of them big bass guys, they'll tell you it's all little things. It's not nothing huge.
Yeah.
It's all these little things compounded together that made them successful.
That's right.
And you got to just put it all together, all at one, and it all has to meet. Mm-hmm. It has to meet at the right time. You know what I mean?
Well, and you're not going to make it work every single time.
Nope.
That's for sure. Nobody ever has.
Then you learn from it and move on. And, next thing you know, the next time around.
We were going to cut this off. I keep forgetting. I was going to ask you. We're going to circle back on muskies and scent.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears into that quick. What's your theory?
My theory is scent doesn't get them to bite. Scent is used for hunting purposes. Mm-hmm. When I catch a muskie in the Detroit River, 80% of the time, there's more there in that, say, 100-yard area. Mm-hmm. Same thing on St. Clair. They found radio tagging them. They group up. So if I'm out in St. Clair casting, there's going to be a bunch together. And they'll stay there a week or two, and then they split. They move a couple miles, and they set up again. And I believe that they smell a certain way for that reason. They say there's a feeding opportunity in this section of the river because I can smell a muskie half a mile up from me. Mm-hmm. If a shark can smell blood 5 miles away, you can bet a muskie has been made to smell that way so they can feed in a group. Because I've had so many days where we put scent on baits, every kind of scent you would imagine, and it makes not a lick of difference for a muskie. Mm. And I think that their senses are more advanced and have gotten beyond the scent. Mm-hmm. That's my theory. I think they smell each other. Because look at how they smell compared to all other fish.
Yeah.
I think they use that to gather and go, he's up there feeding on a bunch of suckers. I'm going up there too and seeing what's up there. Why else do I catch more than a few fish on the same spot?
That's interesting.
The next day they're gone. But for that day, everything lined up. They were there. They smelled each other. They gathered. You know what I mean? And that makes more sense to me than spraying scent on a lure. They're smelling each other, and they're feeding based on that gathering of muskie.
That is a...
I'm telling you,
that is
going
to make me think about it.
I was mad. You said I was mad, man.
Well, yeah, but I like that.
That's a theory that I've never heard anybody say, but I think it's more important. I think they smell each other. I don't think they smell the bait. They see the bait, mm-hmm. which is anything they want to put in their mouth.
That's right.
But they smell each other and they go, there's an opportunity a mile away.
This same fish will swing off a bucktail because he saw your prop spinning in the water, and he'll sit there and stare at that for 5 minutes and go, turn one more time, I'm going to eat you.
That's right. Muskie they drive you insane.
Oh, they're stupid.
But, there's an old guy, Bob Bruner. He's passed away now. He was a D-Day veteran. And he used to tell his customers, he started guiding in the 30s on St. Clair. Mm. He used to tell his customers, you be lucky if you even see one. You know what I mean? So,
man, I've had days where I'd killed to see a muskie.
I've had lots of days of people, that's the same thing people say, man, $40 for a lure. There's been many a days I would have put $40 out to catch a muskie.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So in the big picture.
You know what? It's a cool brotherhood. I've met some great guys that are muskie anglers, and I have some other friends that dabble with other species, but John, you're one of the few. You might be the only one that's as ate up as turn. Probably, I'm not comparing myself to you because you've done a little bit more on that side of things, but you're ate up with the bass fishing like I am, and still ate up with the muskie fishing like I am.
And you know what it goes back to? Al Linder. Bob Azumi from Canada.
Yeah.
All them boys that I grew up, they're all multi-species anglers.
Yeah.
Bill Dance fished for smallmouth and largemouth. Roland Martin. I mean, these guys fish for bass.
Yeah.
Up north, they fished for, I don't know how many times I tried to catch gar and catfish because of Doug Stange.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's when you get back to it, it's In-Fisherman. That was the big one.
Yeah, and it's been
Gord Pizer.
All the writers, Matt Straw, Steve Quinn.
Oh man, it's endless.
It is.
And
we're gonna tell that story. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, I had a good time.
I'm glad you made the time.
That scent thing threw you off, didn't it?
I'm gonna think about that, and especially the next couple days. In fact, I might say something like, "You smell that?
Smell a muskie." Well, I guarantee you, tomorrow when we go, if we catch one, there's another one there.
Yeah, I believe that.
You know,
I believe that. So people want to come fish with you. Where can they find you?
just go to bondyfishing.com or just come on down to Windsor and ask for me at the border.
At the border. I know you well. On a first name basis.
Just, you know, I got a little tackle. We have our manufacturing place, and we make all the baits, and we have a little tackle store we opened up in the front.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you can come in and have the Bondy experience in person.
If I'm there, if I'm not fishing, we got people working in there and that. But yeah, we make a lot of lures, and we make them here. We don't make them overseas. That's my best attribute, and they work. You know, they work, and they're basic lures, and they're not expensive, and they work.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to putting a bunch in some musky
do
teeth
it.
tomorrow.
Let's do it.
Hey, this has been In-Fisherman Storyline. Jon Bondy, thanks for being here. It's been a ton of fun.
It has been a blast.
Hey, we'll catch you here on the next episode.